Okay, so we discussed contingency theories and implicit theories of leadership. We're going to basically wrap up with some of the new leadership theories and some current research looking at leadership. Mainly the current research we're going to be looking at is research on gender differences and gender in leadership, but also cross-cultural leadership. So the new leadership theories, mid-70s on, basically, these new leadership theories emerge with four common characteristics. We need to explain how leaders take organizations to new heights, explain how certain leaders are able to achieve extraordinary levels of motivation, commitment, and dedication, and stress emotionally appealing behaviors, empowerment, development of vision, role modeling, and finally, encourage increased follower self-esteem and satisfaction. So basically, the new leadership theories have been very much focused on top-level leadership and the idea of what makes not just an effective leader, but basically an exceptional leader. And one of the main leadership theories from this kind of group of new theories is transformational leadership theory, which incorporates also these four common characteristics. Transformational leaders is about what kind of leaders will transform an entire organization. In other words, take it to new heights. How does it extraordinary levels of motivation and commitment, how it basically focuses on switching up the structure of the organization to have emotionally appealing behaviors and also encourage group development of the individuals, the employees, with their self-esteem and self-satisfaction. So the interaction of leader and followers raises both to higher levels of motivation and morality. The idea here is that transformational leadership theory is focused on the interaction between the leaders and the followers, with the idea that this interaction can result in more motivation for the followers and overall a perception that the organization itself is more highly moral and worthy of such motivation. So transformational leaders attempt to motivate subordinates to transcend their self-interest and achieve more than they think is possible. So the idea here is, again, finding leaders that are going to take people above and beyond what they would normally expect to be able to do. Now, the converse of transformational leaders are the kind of the baseline of non-transformational leaders, often referred to as transactional leaders. Leaders-follower relationship is based on exchanges only. Leaders operate on contingent reinforcement. So whenever you find a transactional leadership, that's basically what transformational leadership theory expects to be the status quo. The status quo is transactional leadership. And a transactional leader is mainly going to drive their leadership from the top three of those five sources of power. So they're going to have position power, they're going to have legitimate power, they're going to have reward power, and they're going to have coercive power. And they use the three of these to create exchanges between themselves, the leaders, and their subordinates, to provide rewards to those people that perform, to provide punishments to those that don't, based on their legitimate position as a leader. Transformational leaders, by contrast, are going to mainly be focused on those last two, expert and reverent power. Basically, they're trying to get people, now transformational leaders will have the other sources of power, but they try to lead by example and by basically getting everyone to invest in their leadership. So transformational leaders exhibit idealized influence, and idealized influence, again, means that they're not using transactional influence, reward and coercion power, they're using reverent and expert power. They're inspirational. They're inspiring to their subordinates. The subordinates are going to naturally want to, the motivation is going to come from wanting to prove to the leader that they're capable of doing the task. Transformational leaders exhibit intellectual stimulation and individual consideration. So basically, a transformational leader also structures the organization to where the employees are being challenged in a successful way, and they're treating their employees as people, individualized consideration. Now, when we look at these four traits that transformational leaders exhibit, idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration, one thing that's been found beyond these transformational leadership theories is when we start talking about the cross-cultural theories of what traits are predictive of successful leadership across different cultures, a lot of the times what we find are very similar traits to what is the main traits of a transformational leader. In other words, idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration All four of those are highly predictive of effective leadership across multiple cultures. So transformational leaders also tend to focus on long-term goals. They develop and articulate a vision of the company. They inspire to enthusiastically pursue this vision. They coach followers to take responsibility. They don't just motivate, they inspire their workers. So the idea here, the reason it's called transformational, it's basically going, instead of saying, these are our goals, and I will now reward or punish you to get to those goals, this is someone that is selling the goals to the employees. This is someone that's saying, this is what the company wants to do, and I don't want you to do it because I'm telling you to do it. I want you to want this success as well. I want you to participate in this, and I want this to be as much your goal as it is the company's goal or as it is my goal. So research shows that transformational leadership is linked to important outcomes. So when you find someone that is showing these four traits of transformational leadership, you usually will find increases in job satisfaction, increases in organizational commitment, group work performance, and high levels of motivation and commitment. So very strongly related to all positive outcomes in the organization. It also influences OCBs, organizational citizenship behaviors. Again, when you find an organization with a transformational leader, you generally find a greater number of OCB behaviors being done by those subordinates. Can result in two conflicting outcomes. Now, this is somewhat interesting, is that there's basically two paths that transformational leaders can end up going down. The bottom one is what we're wanting, empowered self-direction. The idea here that the transformational leader transforms the entire organization to where the employees are now taking self-direction, they feel empowered, they're taking ownership, and they're now self-motivated, internally motivated to achieve the organization's goals. However, transformational leadership can also result in the top option, dependence on the leader. So the organization becomes completely dependent on kind of the cult of personality of this leader. And if that leader leaves, the whole system collapses. So empowerment by self-direction is once that transformational leader is done transforming the organization, that transformation is self-perpetuating. Employees are now, they are definitely very committed to the leader, but they're more committed to the organizational goals that the leader has basically inspired them on. Dependence on the leader is that effect, that outcome, is completely tied to that individual leader. So now we're going to talk about just some new directions in leadership research in the last 10 or 15 years. We're going to talk about gender and research on gender in leadership, especially as we see more and more women taking on leadership roles, especially in the United States and the Western world. We're going to talk about research looking at cultural differences in leadership and expectations of leaders. And finally, the influence of emotions on leadership. So gender and leadership. In 2007, women make up 46% of the labor force. That number is up today to about 48%. However, they only hold about 3 to 5% of top executive positions. So generally what we find is what's often been referred to as the glass ceiling. We find that women are being hired at an equal percent to the amount that are applying to jobs across almost all industries. So if you have 10 job openings and you have 90 men that apply and 10 women that apply, you usually will find a mix of 1 woman and 9 men make it through. In other words, if you look at the percentage that are applying, the selection ratio is pretty similar across almost all industries. Now, that does not mean that all industries have a 50-50 split between men and women. Certain industries definitely have more men applying at those entry-level positions, and some industries have more women applying. But overall, when we look at the job market, it's almost equally split at the entry level between men and women. And this difference between men and women doesn't really show up until higher levels of management, which also means that you are seeing more and more women managers, and especially mid-level managers. But as you move further and further up a company, the less and less women you find. So the glass ceiling is basically when qualified individuals are prevented from truly achieving all they can because of discrimination. The idea here is the glass ceiling refers to a bunch of different factors. That includes active discrimination, basically unintentional discrimination, cultural stereotypes. It also incorporates, how many women are trying to move up into management. But it definitely represents that there's a certain level in most companies where you start to see less and less women. And these are mainly leadership roles. Glass Ceiling Commission was formed in 1991 in the United States government, specifically within the EEOC, and has been actually looking at ways to alleviate this issue. So Alice Agley and colleagues have basically found that women, when they become leaders, tend overall to actually fit our perceptions of all the theories we've discussed. So basically, if we're talking about authoritarian versus democratic versus laissez-faire leadership, generally speaking, employees prefer democratic leadership style. Women tend to be more likely to be democratic. If we talk about grid training, the behavioral theories, the idea that basically the leaders that are both task and social focused are better leaders, women tend to be more task and socially focused than men. When we talk about transformational leadership, those four main traits of transformational leadership, women in general are more likely to exhibit those traits than men are in their leadership styles. So broadly what that means is that if we actually just look at the traits or the behaviors of men and women leaders, women look like they're better leaders. They're more participative, they're more democratic, and they're more interpersonal. Men and women emerge as leaders in context consistent with their gender roles. So what that means is we do find that men are more likely to emerge as leaders, especially in situations where to emerge as a leader you have to be fairly masculine, aggressive, or direct. Women are more likely to emerge as a leader in a situation that requires more of caring, communal, or social leadership. Now again, that isn't all individuals. There's definitely men that are more likely to emerge as a leader in a social situation, and there are definitely women that are more likely to emerge as a leader in a very dominance-oriented situation. Men and women do not differ overall in their perceived effectiveness as leaders. So once men and women take on leadership roles, we don't find a lot of evidence that their subordinates view them very differently based on their gender. They mainly look to see, are they doing a good job? Are they being an effective leader? So the feminine advantage refers to, again, the fact that when we actually look at most of the theories of leadership, women in general are more likely to actually exhibit those behaviors and traits. Therefore, there's a belief that women are more adaptive at being inclusive, interpersonally sensitive, and nurturing than men, and therefore should be better leaders. In other words, men on average are much more likely to be task-focused, but they're also likely not to be socially focused. Women are capable of being task-focused and are naturally socially focused. So female leaders tend to exhibit higher levels of transformational leadership behaviors and transactional contingent reward behaviors than a male leader. In other words, female leaders tend to be just more engaged. However, as far as evidence of a feminine advantage, that women actually are better or more effective leaders, not a lot of evidence in this situation. So it almost seems like the feminine advantage is actually fighting something else, and that probably has a lot to do with implicit leadership theory. Most of our implicit leadership theory, so implicit leadership theory again says that how we perceive the success of a leader is based on how well they fit our prototype of leaders. And one of the things from the study I was talking about in the last lectures that I conducted, where we were asking people list their top 10 leader or top 5 leaders in all these different situations, women across all 3 of those studies made less than 5% of the people ever listed as a prototype for a leader. And feminine traits were almost never listed as being associated with leadership. So implicit leadership theory suggests that female leaders are bucking, or basically in contrast to our prototype of what an average leader is. There's a large line of research called the Think Manager, Think Male research that basically also finds evidence of this. That when we think about managers, when we think about leaders, we tend to think of them in masculine terms. So though females may actually have more behaviors and traits that are in line with what has been found to be good leadership, that might also just be counterbalancing the negative perception of them as leaders based on implicit leadership behavior or theory. So culture and leadership. There's been a lot of research on the theories of cross-cultural leadership, and again, what's being looked for here is how does leadership vary from culture to culture? What do the prototypes of leadership look like from culture to culture? And are there specific traits or behaviors that are commonly good or commonly associated with effective leadership across all cultures? So House and colleagues has done a lot of looking at this and basically looking at the expected, accepted, and effective leader behaviors, and have found that they do vary by culture. What a particular culture values in a leader is based on implicit leadership theory. So again, different cultures have different implicit theories of what a leader should look like. One major study that has looked at this has actually even been named the Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness Project. It involved 61 countries with over 200 researchers researching leadership in all of these different cultures. And there was a strong focus as they conducted this research. They started to find that one of the things that was coming out of all this research on leadership across cultures was one big factor: individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. That was one of the main factors that was coming out of all this research, was that the implicit leadership theories, or what was associated with being a good or effective leader, differed based on whether the country was strongly individualistic or strongly collectivistic. But they did also find that the traits and behaviors important to leadership across cultures are integral to transformational leadership. So again, transformational leadership, leading from reverent and expert power and inspiring your subordinates, was effective across all these cultures. So surveys measuring 59 leadership traits were given to international and American graduate students. Researchers found that leadership prototypes do vary across cultures. No single trait emerged in the top 5 across all cultures. So again, just asking individual across these 69 or 61 different countries, asking people to rate the top 5 out of 59 leadership traits. No country included the same thing in all across all those lists. So if you looked at the 61 countries, there was no one trait that was in all 61 countries. However, if you categorize those cultures by Western versus Eastern, and again, looking at Western as an individualistic group of individualistic cultures, in other words, the individual is more important than the group, or Eastern cultures, the group is more important than the individual, there was some consistency. So across all individualistic or Western cultures, being determined was very highly prototypical across all of those countries. And in the Eastern or collectivistic cultures, intelligence was highly prototypical across all of those different countries. Finally, I want to talk briefly about emotional leadership. So transformational leaders express more positive emotions than transactional leaders. In other words, transformational leaders actually use emotion as a part of their leadership structure. Transactional leaders do not. And that's another way to define transformational leaders, is transformational leaders, when we talk about them trying to inspire, what they're trying to inspire is emotions. They were trying to get people to be emotionally invested in the workplace. And another big predictor of transformational leaders is emotional intelligence. And we talked about emotional intelligence briefly when we were talking about selection and various tests we could use to select people for organizations. So emotional intelligence is the ability to assess and manage one's own emotions and understanding others' emotions. And it's a key variable in determining leadership effectiveness. Emotionally intelligent leaders tend to create better bonds with their followers. And what that means is that, think about LMX theory. That's the idea that one of the ways to determine if you're having an effective leader is what is the relationship between that leader and its subordinates. Well, a leader that has high emotional intelligence is going to have, across the board, better relationships with all of their subordinates. And a transformational leader with high emotional intelligence is also going to be better at inspiring their subordinates. Some research has found, indeed, that emotional skills can be taught and that leaders can be given tools to allow them to become more transformational leaders. So again, from an organizational perspective, if you were an organizational consultant coming into an organization, there's a lot of these theories that you could try to implement to help their leadership. You could use grid training from the behavioral methods that we were talking about in the first set of slides. The idea of measuring where they are on initiating structure and social or concern structure, and then moving them to where they're more focused on both task and social. For transformational leaders, it's about coaching and teaching a leader to rely less on legitimate reward and coercion power, and learn how to use referent and expert power to inspire your subordinates, and also how to be more emotionally in tune to your subordinates. So that's pretty much what we're going to end up on as far as leadership theories. Like I said, there's a lot out there, and I think the big take-home message to kind of keep in your own mind when thinking about leadership is, one of the problems with measuring leadership in organizations is it is a very complex situation. there is evidence from the research that the type of person does matter. So some traits are more associated with leader emergence. The type of behaviors matter. Certain behaviors are more successful in certain situations. The situation matters. So what kind of organization you're in, what the past history of that organization is, and where the current state of that organization is matters. And the subordinates' perception of their relationships with those leaders matter. So this is somewhat kind of restricted the usefulness or utility of a lot of these theories. That's one of the reasons that transformational leadership style has really picked up a lot of steam recently, because it's a little bit more of a universal theory. It's been found cross-culturally, and the types of traits and behaviors that a transformational leader does, those 4 key traits, are things that someone can be taught to do.